Hi, I'm Amber Johnson of Gigi's Thimble, and today I'm going to show you how to make this fun mat to stick under your sewing machine to hold all of your notions, keep them close by for a fun day of sewing. It's got a little pocket on one side that you can fill up with your rotary cutter, your pattern, a bunch of other notions, and then it can hang off the table and you can put your sewing machine right on top of it. And here's a list of the supplies you'll need. Okay, first let's talk about the fabric. I designed a cheater print to go along with my new fabric collection with Riley Blake Designs called Feels Like Home. And if you don't know what a cheater print is, it's where a fun like quilt block or motif is printed right onto the fabric. It cuts out all of the work for you. And I love pineapple blocks, so I knew I needed to design a cheater print that had pineapple blocks on it. And they can be very intricate and time consuming to make. And so this cheater print cuts out all of the work for you. And I want to show you exactly where this block is, since there's so many pieces in a pineapple block. I have these little frames to show you. So right there, that's the pineapple block. Isn't that fun? Okay, so you're going to take your cheater print and some backing fabric and batting, and you're going to quilt it however you'd like. You can quilt it on your domestic machine yourself. You can take it to a long arm quilter and they can quilt something fun on it for you. I quilted mine myself using a grid pattern. So you can get that quilted however you like, and then we need to trim off the excess batting and backing fabric. I've already trimmed a couple of sides of this, but I wanted to just show you. I'm gonna find the edge of a full block and just trim on those lines of the cheater print. And just cut through all 3 layers of fabric and batting. Then you can discard this or put it with your scraps, and then we'll trim off the rest on this side. And again, I'm looking to make sure that I get my ruler lined up on the edge of a full block. Okay. So now that I have my mat all trimmed up, we can set this aside and we're going to make the pocket to hold all of our tools. So I have some 12 gauge plastic that I cut into a long strip for my pocket. And the first thing you need to do with that is to bind it with some double fold bias tape. And I'm going to show you how to make that yourself. You can make it with any coordinating fabric. I have a long strip here, and I'm going to press this strip of fabric in half once and press it with a hot iron, with the wrong sides together, and just press the whole thing, the entire length of the strip in half. And then you're going to open it up a little bit and press each edge in half again towards that middle crease. And just be careful not to burn your fingers. And here we're making the double fold bias tape that we're going to use to bind. Okay, and then we'll do the other side. Okay, and then once you have both of those edges folded into the center, you're going to fold the whole thing in half and press it one more time and just try to make sure those folded edges are lined up well. And this is going to create your double fold bias tape. Okay, great. So now we're going to stick our plastic into this fold and top stitch it in place. So I'm just going to use an 1/8 inch seam allowance. And I'll just kind of make sure that plastic is pushed all the way in to the fold as far as it can go. You can pin this in place if you'd like. I'm just stopping every few inches to make sure that everything's in place. Okay, once you've attached that bias tape to the edge of your plastic, you'll have this, and you can just trim off the excess. And now you're going to sew this to the bottom edge of your mat. So my backing is a little bit directional, so I'm going to make sure that's going the right way, and then we're going to lay this and line up the bottom edge of the plastic on top of the mat with raw edges together. And I've got some little clips here that I can use to keep everything in place. And I'm just going to baste this pocket to the edge of my mat. And it will get secured down again later when we bind the whole thing. So back to the sewing machine, and we'll just use like 1/8 inch seam allowance to stitch this in place. And I like to go over the bias tape a few times just to really secure that in place. So I'm just going to start stitching, go forward, and then I'll just back up. That should do it. And now I'll just continue on. Again, using that 1/8 inch seam allowance. And when I get up to the corner, I'm going to leave my needle position down, but I'll lift up my presser foot and pivot the the mat and the pocket, and then start stitching down the next length. Then I'll stop at the corner again with my needle in the down position and lift my presser foot and pivot the mat and pocket. And then I'll just sew that last edge. And then again, I'm just gonna back up and do some extra stitches over the bias tape. Okay, so we're done basting that on, and we can trim off the excess. And there's a little bit on the other side. Whoops. Okay, so now we have our pocket in place, and now we need to figure out what dimensions we want each individual pocket to be. So you can customize this to the different tools and things you're gonna keep in your pockets. So I have a bunch of things here that I like to keep close by when I'm sewing. I've got some rulers, different sizes, my pattern, rotary cutter, scissors, and a few different pins, and a seam cutter, or a seam ripper, of course. We all need those sometimes, right? So you can kind of lay those out on top of your pocket just to kind of figure out the spacing. And I like to keep the taller things on the sides so that they're not right in front of me when I'm sewing. And then we'll make space for some pins, marking pencil, and scissors. And I like to use just some good old-fashioned painter's tape, or you can get washi tape. You'll just tear off little strips, and you're going to sew right next to the tape. And just remember what side of the tape you want to stitch on. So I'm just going to plan on always stitching on the right side of the tape. And in determining the width of your pocket, you need to take into account the thickness of your notion. So I know I want to have my rotary cutter right here. So I'm going to just stick some painter's tape right there. I'd say always go a little bit bigger than too small with your pocket size. And I also try to make my lines of stitching on the stitches from my grid quilting on my mat. So that's just a tip. So I'm going to go ahead and sew along this tape. Okay, I'm going to stick this under my presser foot, and I'm not going to sew on the bias tape. So I'll just start stitching right under the bias tape, and you can stitch in place once or twice just to secure that. And then stitch down to the bottom edge of your mat. And then we'll take that out and do the next set of stitches. Okay, I just created all my other pockets. I'm working on the last one. I love this grid quilting because it shows me straight lines where I can make my stitches. So after I've done all my pockets, I'm just going to remove all the tape and trim my threads. Okay, so once you've removed all the tape and clipped the threads, we need to figure out where we want to place our rickrack so we can roll this whole thing up and take it to our next quilting retreat. So you're going to fold your mat in half, and we're going to want this rickrack in this top corner. So you're folded in half, and then we need to find the halfway point right here. And I believe this is about 14 inches. So we'll just find the 7-inch point. And I've got 2 pieces of rickrack here. And I will just pin them at the 7-inch mark. And I want this rickrack to be going this direction so it's out of the way of the binding, because we're going to bind this after we attach the rickrack. So I'm just going to pin this in place and get ready to just secure this with my sewing machine. We don't want these stitches to show after we've bound it, so we'll use an eighth of an inch seam allowance to base this in place. And just sew this, and I would probably go back and forth over it a couple of times just to make sure it's really secure in there. So now we've got everything done. We just need to bind it. And machine binding is going to be the easiest way to bind this because of the plastic. So we've got lots of tutorials on the Riley Blake website. If you want to check one of those out, we'll put a link below. And that's it. Thank you for joining me in making this sewing machine mat. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.